What's going on, YouTube? Thanks for tuning into the channel. Welcome to Dak Attack. Coming back with a book review. I know I haven't done one of these in a very long time. So this one is going to be on like a book that is probably like in the last couple years the most impactful book besides Laws of Human Nature that I've read from an author I never read before. So Yuval Noah Harari wrote a book called Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind. I was gonna purchase the book and wait for it to come here so I could like lift it up and show it. I really just listened to it, but I've listened to it like repetitively, and this is a long book. This is not like a 2-hour, 3-hour book. This is multiple hours to finish the entire thing, but it really changed my mind. To kind of set the stage and preface it, I think it's good for everybody, but if you have like an inclination towards like evolutionary biology, anthropology type of interest, it'll be definitely good for you. If you're also into some of like the red pill stuff, I think like in the dating and gender differences, makes a lot of assertions on that, but really it's mostly evolutionary biology, evolutionary anthropology, and that's something that I'm super interested in. So let me get into it. I'm really going to just kind of touch on 3 main points through the book. As I mentioned, it's super long, so just even condense it into that, it's pretty difficult, but these were the 3 main takeaways I had. I will say that also to note, there's not a ton of real conclusions that the book comes to. It's a lot about just kind of presenting the current understanding, him giving his perspective, and then you kind of taking it from there. So the first one is a little bit hard to imagine for a lot of people. When we think about humans, we generally think about us being separate from, you know, other species. Like the same way, you know, we understand like a lion, a tiger, a cougar, a jaguar, a panther, that's basically a cougar, a leopard, my favorite animal, are all pretty much like connected to the same, I think they're in the same genus. I think that's the correct word. We don't really look at us as having that, but if you know anything about evolution, there were a ton, like Homo erectus, Homo ergaster, the hardworking man, Homo sapiens, which means the wise man, Homo habilis, Homo neanderthalis, Neanderthals. So there are a lot of those different types of humans. There was a point where there was a bunch of different humans, the same way we would look at monkeys, the same way we look at the big cats, the same way there's like wolves, foxes, dogs, hyenas. There were a ton of humans out at the same time. So that was just a very interesting concept. And then really the question comes to what happened to them. So there's a couple theories. One is that there were great wars and they were attacked. Actually, there is a great war that people understand between Homo sapiens and Homo neanderthalis, that there was a point where Homo sapiens left Africa and then came back because they couldn't stay there. And why are there no other ones left? And that's a huge piece of like history that's not fully understood, and it's probably something that's hard for us to grasp. Why did we get rid of those other humans but didn't get rid of all the other animals? Lots of evidence that we did kind of destroy a lot of like ancient fauna, a lot of other ancient animals, but very clearly there is some sort of extinction that was done to all of the other human species, and a lot of this happened around, I think, 70,000 years ago during the what they're calling the cognitive revolution. I'm going to get a little bit deeper into the cognitive revolution in the second part on this, but it's the first thing to understand is that there was a time where there was a ton of different humans, species, and we were not like the top of the food chain the way we think of ourselves. And it's not that we were super smart. There were other humans that had large brains, a lot of the same types of behaviors that we have. But at a point around 70,000 years ago during the cognitive revolution, there was a big change. So the big change that he talks about that this had was the idea of common myths. So what he says that separates humans from other species is this: is our ability to lie about things that aren't present. Like a monkey can lie. They have calls that say there's a hawk. They have calls that says watch out, there's a lion. And they've done studies where they play this call to monkeys and they'll run away, and if they play the hawk sound, they'll look up in the sky or whatever. And there's also experiences where they've had monkeys like lie, say, oh, there's a lion, the monkey runs away and he steals the banana and eats the banana. So other species can lie. That's not really something that is super amazing, but we can talk about things that don't exist. Like I can tell you, you know, a zebra riding a unicycle around the river, and you can picture that. And it's something you've never seen, but it's something you can understand. And what he says that this gives the power of is a common myth, that it's very hard to trust somebody you don't know unless there's something common that you believe in. To bring it to this time, not to kind of keep everything in the past, because he kind of does things chronologically. If you think about why, you know, maybe when you walk into a particular venue that you don't automatically get suspicious of everybody that's in the store, and you know that when you give your money to the cash register, they're not going to rob all of your money, is because we have common this about law and understanding that, you know, you can't just break in and rob somebody's shit, because it's really hard to have personal property unless there is a common understanding that somebody's not going to just come and take your shit through brute force, which, you know, in the monkey or dog world, that's how it would work. There is no trust because there is no common understanding, which allowed us to work in very large bands, very large groups of people. So being in those large bands, he starts talking about things that we accept as being true that are basically myths. So something like human rights. Definitely in this day and age, especially where I live in America, human rights is a huge conversation. It's something that's kind of written into the Declaration of Independence, of a way of distinguishing that. And then that document is basically a myth that everybody is understanding. Even the nation of America, what really connects all of us together? It's this myth that we all feel like we are part of this thing that doesn't really exist. It's kind of a myth in your head, and it incorporates a lot of cooperation. But then when you start to get into a lot of these myths, you start to like kind of look at a lot of things as being way more malleable than you thought of. Like Hammurabi's code was basically the first law that was really created and documented that I guess historians have understood. And if you read that shit, it's kind of like basically that's where terms like eye for an eye come from. Like if you blind somebody legally, like the compensation was you blind them. If they killed your daughter, you go kill his daughter. That's like literally written how it is, and basically people accepted this as being just, and it was a way for society to get along with strangers without having any real connection to each other. Then what he really gets into is he starts talking about religions and how religions were myths. And if you think about the Crusades and all of these huge wars that were kind of fought over religions, and then the reason why people wanted to conquer these other people, a lot of it had to do with the myth of religion, that, you know, you're saving these savages from their, you know, savage ways and bringing Christianity upon them. That was kind of a myth that led to a lot of the colonization. And then he gets to really where we are today, which I think is really where it kind of all comes together, is like capitalism as a myth. And then capitalism that basically has spread to essentially all of the I would say modern countries, like the countries that can really compete on any kind of level. If you're not on a capitalistic system, you're pretty much at the mercy of the other capitalistic nations and groups, because they will, if they want to, they can basically destroy you. And he describes that the reason why that really put everybody onto that was the combining of science and the military. And this was a really interesting concept I never really thought about, but he basically talks about how, you know, if you go to 1000 AD, you know, the same military technology that they were using in 1000 AD, at 1500, they, like a general from 1000 AD could easily fight in 1500 AD, and there wouldn't be this huge discrepancy in technology. It would just really be like who's a better strategist. So back in the day, the ways wars were fought was really more about the strategy of the actual general, and that's why there's a lot of like books on like Napoleon and, you know, Sun Tzu and Hannibal and, you know, Caesar, because there was a lot more ingenuity that was happening. Nowadays, if you took Napoleon, one of the greatest generals by a lot of people's standards, and put him to fight any war now, he would be decimated because the technology has advanced so far. In that, around like the mid 1800s or the mid 1700s is really where that combination was happening, and then it basically expanded and put any of the countries that they combine science and war or in a way better situation than other societies. And he basically explains that's really where Western civilization started to take over, because if you look at currency from a global standpoint, most of all of the wealth was in Asia and Africa. Like for the vast majority of history, that's where the majority of wealth was right in that, I don't know, I guess you call it the Mediterranean Sea. That whole area was where all of the wealth really sat, and China had a way better likelihood to actually grow in the sense of like taking over everything from like a power standpoint around that time. So it actually doesn't make a lot of sense that you know, like England and Netherlands and Amsterdam conquered all these things. And when you look at America, a lot of these places like France, that's why it's called Louisiana, Louis, you know, a lot of the Northeast was actually conquered by Amsterdam first. And when you really think about the entire America's continent, it's really only owned by 3 different languages. That's Spanish, or 4 languages: Spanish, Portuguese, French, and English. So they basically owned that whole continent and conquered that whole continent. And a lot of it was just mixing science with war, which wasn't really done until like the 17 and 1800s. And that's where a lot of that success happened. The last thing he touches on is that we're kind of going into a global myth. Like at this point, most countries, even if they are a communism, whether it's China and Russia, they are on a capitalistic system, because you need that to compete. And back in the day, there was like, I forgot what he called it, but it was like some kind of rule somebody came up with that in past history, I think before like 1900, there was always a situation where within a year, a neighboring country could be in a full-blown war through very low amount of events. Nowadays, that is just not true. There is not really any kind of event that you could be at a full-blown war with another country, especially if you are an advanced country. Because, and by what I mean by full-blown war is like back in the day when, you know, the French and Indian War, it was like you're sending all your troops to fight the war. This is what the whole country's doing, and that's where the world wars came from. But now that we've combined science and warfare, it's gotten to a point where a full-blown war is just not even feasible anymore. You'll just blow up the world. Like, you can't even do a full-blown war. So there's no amount of events that could happen in a year that can lead to full-blown war as it was before. And we're actually getting onto a global myth where the world is becoming the nation. So even when back in the day, if somebody were to have a revolution, it was generally a revolution comparing their life to the life of the past. So if Egypt has a civil revolution nowadays, it's more they're comparing their human rights to other countries across the globe, saying that we don't have the rights of, say, people in America or people in Germany, or we don't have the rights of this other country, not saying that you've taken the rights that we had before. So it's like we're kind of on this huge global myth, and we're kind of all trying to converge on that. Really, I didn't really have a lot of conclusions that necessarily came from what I'm reading, but it really gives me a lot of ideas as to like how things are forming. As I mentioned before, how things are very malleable and can change over time, that what we accept as being true is like there is no real truth. There is what it is, and then there's these myths that the human, you know, animal loves to create to make things make more and more sense. So that's really it for this one. The one thing I did want to add that I did think was pretty interesting as well was his view on like gender dynamics, because I know like feminism is a huge thing that's pushed nowadays. There's a lot of, you know, obviously a lot of content that goes with it that is more on the mainstream level, and then there's kind of like this undercurrent of things that go maybe against it. But one of the things he said was very interesting, of like there is some sort of natural falling into place of the male, I don't want to say on top, but like the male dominant to female hierarchy. That there's something about that it's cross-cultural, that in anthropology that's always one of the main things, is you look for things that happen separate from each other, so it seems like it's more human, and a lot of the feministic ideas of why it's not the natural way don't really make sense. So the one is that men are stronger than women, and I think that I've always thought like, oh, that kind of makes sense, until he proposed this, that like just because you're stronger and doesn't mean that you would have more power, and that's not true in the majority of like human systems. Like if you think about slavery in America, any plantation owner would have got whooped by all of his slaves, but he still held all that power. Generally, a general is an older man, and in plenty of societies, it would be like a prince or something, or a king that didn't have any fucking war experience, that's running the whole thing, that could easily just beat them up and kill them. They're way more trained a lot of the time. So the idea that power itself is the thing that takes over doesn't really make sense. And then also the other one is that because a woman carries a baby for all of this time, that that gave guys basically the ability to take the power during that time, because they were so dependent. But he talks about other species, I think it's like bonobo chimps, that actually they create a matriarchal society that actually protects the females that are smaller and weaker, because I think they're sexually dimorphic too, which means male and females are different sizes, that they protect. So that also doesn't really bear out. So once again, he doesn't really come to a full conclusion, but I just thought that was interesting, because a lot of the main ideas that you hear, and that's where it comes back to the whole myth thing, that these are not, people are just making up things to believe in, to be on. So a lot of the things that you might believe or other people might believe, it might not be the greatest thing to feel, it just might not be a real thing, like in the world, like objectively, like the nation, like me being an American, and if you're in America, you being an American, is there really something as in common with us on that level? Or is it just something we believe in because it makes it easier to, interact throughout the society? So that's really it for this one. I think it's like a fucking awesome book. I'm listening to it right now, and that's really what sparked the video. And wanted to bring up another book review, because those are definitely my most popular videos that I put up. So fuck with the vibe, welcome to the tribe, like, comment, subscribe, you know what to do. Until next time, peace out.